Hello, Musical Praise family. I trust everybody is well. This is the second lesson of the sixth module, where we introduced in the first lesson the concept of intervals, specifically the whole step and the half step. Okay, we're going to build on that. So, we're introducing in this lesson a new concept, and it's called the tetrachord. And let's break it down. So the word tetra in the Greek means four. So a tetrachord is a four-note chord. However, the unique aspect of that, it's four consecutive notes. So I'll come back to that in just a little bit. As you recall, there are many types of scales, many types of scales. We have the major scale, we have minor scales, we have jazz scales, blues, and so forth. So we are only focusing on the major scale. However, with each type of scale, there are tetrachords within each type of scale. And the interval pattern of those tetrachords is unique to each scale type. So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the tetrachords that are embedded within a major scale. So there are two tetrachords in each major scale. We're going to look at the breakdown of what those notes are using the C major scale as our example. And then we're going to take a deeper dive into the interval pattern of each of those tetrachords. And that is going to give you a very thorough understanding of the major scale, specifically the interval pattern that makes up a major scale. So we're going to just dive right into this, and we're going to look at the first tetrachord as a deep dive of the C major scale. And then we're going to move over to the second tetrachord and then bring everything together. So let's just go right into it, and let's look at the first tetrachord of the C major scale. Okay, so taking a look at the C major scale, let's look at the first four notes of the C major scale, because that is going to be our first tetrachord. So the first four notes of the C major scale is C, D, E, and F, as you can see by the keyboard right below. Okay, those are your first. That's your first tetrachord. Remember, because it's four consecutive notes. Right? Now, let's take a look at the interval pattern between those first four notes of the C major scale. So, the interval pattern the interval between C and D is a whole step. Remember, a whole step is two half steps. Okay? Moving from D to E, the interval from D to E is also a whole step. Okay? And then from E to F, it's a half step, right? Because a half step is moving from one note to the very next note, regardless of whether it's black or white. There's no black key or no key in between E and F, so that's a half step. So the first tetrachord, the interval pattern is whole, half. All right? That's the interval pattern of the first tetrachord. We are now going to jump over to the second tetrachord to look at what those notes comprise of. What are the notes that comprise of the second tetrachord, and then look at the interval pattern of that tetrachord. All right, now onto the second tetrachord of the C major scale. So what are the last four notes of the C major scale? It's G, A, B, C. All right, now let's look at the interval pattern between each of those notes. So going from G to A is a whole step. Okay, A to B is a whole step. And then B to C is a half step. So it's whole step, half step for this second tetrachord of the C major scale. And now what we're going to do is we're going to bring everything together and just take a holistic look at the C major scale, looking at both tetrachords just so we have a very clear understanding of the structure of the C major scale and the interval pattern that makes up the C major scale. Below, you will see that the keyboard is showing you both tetrachords of the C major scale, as well as the interval pattern of each of those tetrachords. So the first tetrachord again, the interval pattern is whole step, half step between C, D, E, and F. The interval pattern for the second tetrachord for G, A, B, C is also whole step, half step. Now, if you will note, we are missing one interval, and that is the interval between F and G. So I want you to think about that for a second. What is the interval pattern between F and G? And then that way we're going to have a complete picture of the interval pattern of a C major scale. So I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that, and then we will bring it together. Okay, so the interval that we were missing previously was the interval between F and G, and you are correct. The interval from F to G is a whole step. So take a look at this, because this interval pattern, which is whole step, half step, and then the middle of that is another whole step, and then on the other side of that whole step is also whole step, half step. That is the interval pattern for every major scale. And we're going to go through that a few times just to make sure that you have that understanding. We're going to go through a couple other major scales just to show you that anytime you have a major scale, this is the interval pattern that makes up that major scale. So whole step, half step is the first three. Then you have a whole step in the middle. And then the remaining three intervals is whole step, half step. And so now you begin to understand why we had to cover off on introducing intervals, specifically the whole step and the half step, because it's foundational for not just the major scale, but for all scales. But we're just starting with the major scale. So just take a look at this, and then we're going to review just to make sure you have an excellent understanding of this concept.